Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Rise Urban Nation, where we unite, uplift, and ignite the stories of Black excellence all over the world. Today, we diving into New Orleans, and I got somebody spicy on the show today who just had a house full of guests, and she's like, y'all gonna have to leave because we got an interview, and I appreciate that. Now I'm kind of mad I'm not in Louisiana, so I could have had a good time with you. Coming to you today, we are joined by a trailblazer in philanthropy. You know, I forgot to make sure I got this right. Is it Carmen James Randolph? Did I get it right?
Yes, it is. Yes, you
All
got
right.
it right.
The founding president and the CEO of Women's Foundation of the South. Carmen, it's an honor to have you and share your journey on the stage. How are you doing this? How are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing real good. Thank you so much for having me.
Now we gotta tell the people the barbecue. What you have on the smoker? What was on the smoker today? What was on there?
Well, my husband has a barbecue and catering business, and it's called Coco Smokehouse, and he has quite a bit of reputation for his ribs, and also for brisket, and he does everything. But the ribs and the brisket are the star of the show. And the funny thing is, the business started because I don't eat meat.
Get out of here.
And during the pandemic, he was like, sis, I gotta have some meat. And he had been smoking stuff before that and said, but you can't just eat, you can't smoke a small brisket. And a brisket is a lot. And ribs, you buy like the baby backs, a big pack.
Yeah.
And he said, you think all these people who say they like my ribs will actually buy them? So I can, not waste them. And I said, why don't you try it? And he's been rolling ever since. So anyway, he just smoked some ribs and some salmon, and we had a whole crew here. The director of our Impact video series, Eternal Poke, and some of our production crew, our strategic comms folks were all here. We had a premiere of our Impact documentary in Jackson, Mississippi. So we've been on the road, drove in from Jackson, got the smoker rolling, and then just threw down, and then I said goodbye.
Okay. All right. See, and shout out to Coco's. Coco's, right?
Yes, Coco's.
If y'all out there, y'all make sure y'all show my brother out. That's my new brother right now, because I'm linked up with you, so he my new brother now. I gotta go to Coco's when I go down there. Y'all make sure y'all show Coco some love.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Now, I was looking at your remarkable history and story. We both from the DC area. I grew up in Northwest Washington, DC, with the Calvin Coolidge.
Okay.
And you have a remarkable journey from DC all the way down to now being the woman of the South. How somebody go from DC to be a leader, a phenomenal woman in the South, especially in New Orleans? Like, how you get from DC to there? And then tell me, where about DC did you do most?
Oh my goodness. I lived all over the DMV. And in terms of the work that I did in DC, my early work started in public housing. So you can just imagine, I went in and out of public housing communities all over the district. That's how I started my work. And it was through that work that I came to understand up close and personal what injustice looks like. Right? Just what injustice looks like, what our people are going through. For instance, I used to work in Potomac Gardens. I don't know if you are familiar with Potomac Gardens in Southeast DC before there was a fence up. Now, Potomac Gardens is a public housing community in the middle of Capitol Hill, on the southeast side of Capitol Hill. And the neighbors were complaining. Now, given there was a moment that there was an open air drug market there, lots of issues, lots of, violence. It became a rough place. And the neighbors advocated for a fence to be put up around Potomac Gardens. And a fence was put up. So now there's an wrought iron fence that surrounds the community. I think there's only one or two openings. You can, they said the fire department has the ability to open the other entrances, but like very little ways in, very few ways out. And at the time that fence went up was when I was working with residents and helping them with organizing. And you had children who were calling, who began calling Potomac Gardens Baby Lorton. So this goes way back to when Lorton Prison was the prison where most people who were incarcerated in the district were sent. And for children to start calling their home Baby Lorton, calling it a baby prison. Think about that. So anyway, that's where I was in my 20s and I got my awareness of what deep injustice looks like and impacting one life at a time, one young person, one single mom, one elderly person. It was important and beautiful work, but I desired to do more. And that is what led me into the field of philanthropy. So I got my start in philanthropy working at the Meyer Foundation.
Okay.
And I was at Meyer for quite a bit of time. And I would say ultimately, I'm a granddaughter of the South. I have family here. I have family, a lot of family in South Carolina and what have you. And
I got family in South Carolina too.
What part?
So Greensville. What's the other part there? Greensville. Gosh, I can't think of it to save my life right now. But I got family out there too. Don't tell me. And this would be crazy if we got some kinfolk or something.
I'm looking at you real good now. In Sumter, South Carolina. And I'm told too now that I have family in the Sea Islands, and I did not know that before. And such to the point when I visited the Sea Islands last summer. And this older brother, where I went to this market, said, "Oh, you here to see family?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm here to shop this." He said, "Well, your people are here, right?" He said, "Because your people, you look just like your people." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But you know how that thing is. We're all piecing together our stories. Some of it I know, and some of it I still have yet to learn.
Same here. You know, when you were telling me about your journey through DC, I think because I live in San Diego now, how my journey was a beginning crash course as well in DC because, you know, I grew up in DC when it was the murder capital and before Chirac was a thing, right? And some of these neighborhoods, when I used to go visit some of my friends in Southeast, I didn't want to go to some of them neighborhoods because I knew what it was about.
Berry
and the
Farm
lifestyle.
and all of that. Yeah, those are the neighborhoods that I worked in.
Yeah. And so like I'm very familiar with that story and that journey. I remember coming back now though, like I don't know how long ago you've been back. You go to certain Southeast San Diego now, like it don't look like Chocolate City, but it look more like a chocolate chip cookie. Like I got nice, clean townhomes there. White people walking around. I was like, what in the world happened?
You know what my girl told me? She said, "Oh, Carm, this is now Latte City." Not the Chocolate City anymore. This is Latte City. I was like, what?
They done gentrified it now. But you know, thinking about your journey too, how it's like you went and you was working in that environment, how New Orleans has some of the same rough neighborhoods and the same cycle of oppression that goes on to those neighborhoods that it affects that that community and that the mindset and how they live. Like from seeing those two different type of communities and working in these two areas,
absolutely.
do you see a difference?
Historically, you see things like looking at the impact of, for instance, the Hope 6 project that leveled a lot of public housing communities with intention of bringing some folks back into mixed income communities, and seeing how that forever changed the landscape of the city, of those neighborhoods, and what have you. And in New Orleans, there's a story of not only that Hope 6 change to public housing, but then you layer onto that the natural disaster, or well, I shouldn't say that. Some people say it was natural disaster. Some people say it was not. It was more man-made disaster of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the impact of the city, because you had public housing that was just shuttered up. And you also have areas of the city that don't look like how it did prior to Katrina. So anyway, this is a place that has been rebuilding. We're still rebuilding. The built environment, you might come here and things look, like a lot has come back and on track. But here, the story is one of, okay, the built environment has come back, but how have people fared? How is this a story of equitable recovery, or is it at all? You have, in some cases, Black folks doing worse now than they were then. You have housing prices that more than quadrupled in terms of rents. You had rents, people were paying, like, for instance, $600 for a one-bedroom apartment prior to Hurricane Katrina. And then afterwards, those same places went up to maybe $1,500 a month. So, and now you have some places with rents. I mean, when I moved here from DC, had this idea that, okay, I'm moving to the South. All right, my money's gonna go a little further. Not very expensive, very expensive to live here. So anyway.
Thanks for sharing that whole backstory and then, some of your remarkable journey as well. Now, I'm curious, what really inspired you to focus your efforts on women and girls of color in the Southern states?
Sure. So, having worked in philanthropy for, I would say, the majority of my career, coming to New Orleans to become the vice president of the Greater New Orleans Foundation, which is a community foundation. So community foundations are an interesting kind of animal. They work with donors. Some people call a community foundation a philanthropic bank, where you can put money for your charitable giving, trying to make it in simple terms. And it struck me very early on that there was not one fund dedicated to women and girls, let alone women and girls of color, at the Community Foundation. I was a part of helping to build a network of regional and national funders, all interested in investing in New Orleans. And of our counterparts here in Louisiana, there weren't women's funds or dedicated portfolios for women and girls of color. Yet we had pressing issues like incredibly high rates of maternal mortality, women dying here, Black women dying 4 times the national average, at least. I don't know how much higher it has grown. Issues like pay equity and the pay gap. A lot of businesses, nonprofits, not having maternal leave policies or parental leave or family leave policies. And
how is that even possible? Isn't that illegal? Like, isn't you supposed to have some type of? I feel like that should be illegal in some ways.
No, a lot of places. This is, when I came here over a decade ago, that was the case. And it wasn't just at the Community Foundation. There was not a family leave policy at that time. There was when I left, but there wasn't when I got there. There wasn't a family leave policy. And as I started talking to colleagues in the field, there weren't policies that a lot of people working, whether it was in corporate or other nonprofits, also did not have that. So being able to take off with pay for having a child, adopting a child. Those things were not in place. So, and it just struck me, the injustice of it all. Now, given working in a field where those of us who have access to making decisions about money and resourcing communities, resourcing nonprofits, some people call it blessing different nonprofit leaders. Often those people do not look like the community in which they are investing in. Okay. And that always struck me. Like, even being a program officer at a foundation, I was not the ultimate one making the decision. Nonprofits had to jump through hurdles to get through us, and we had to jump through our own set of hurdles to get the money to those leaders, right? And so often the people who are making those decisions do not look like the communities that need the resources. So that's just how, and that, I had always just kind of struck with me. And so, and then looking at how the issues of women and girls were not on anyone's agenda. And my daughter was in high school. So my daughter graduated from high school in New Orleans, and she was a part of a project where she was doing like kind of journalism and looking at the school to prison pipeline and interviewing students and looking at the criminalization of girls in New Orleans. And it was just work that just hurt my heart, and a reality that was very close to me, having a daughter myself. And I attempted to work with groups to get a fund started at Ganoff. And the more I started to think about who was most impacted by the lack of attention, by the lack of priority on our issues, it was women who were Black, brown, indigenous, and what have you. And I started to think, okay, there's no women's foundation in the state of Louisiana. Perhaps we should look at starting a foundation instead of a fund that you'd put some money in it, and once the money was spent, it was gone, right? So maybe we need a more permanent kind of philanthropic solution. So I started talking to sisters in philanthropy who have been my colleagues and mentors and just thought partners for years. And our board chair, our founding board chair, Sharice West Scantleberry, she's the president of the Winthrop Rockefeller. She's like, sister, that's not just an issue in New Orleans. That same is true here in Arkansas. Started talking to another sister, Gladys Washington, one of our founding board members, who at the time was with the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation in North Carolina. She's like, Carmen, that is just not a New Orleans thing. This is here. So the more we started to talk, it's like, okay, so we have to make, not only create a vision, but make it bigger, bigger. Like, and someone even said to me, if your vision doesn't scare you, it's not big enough. So it's like, all right, so we have to have a vision that looks at women of color and girls of color in the entire South. And so we came together as sisters to start dreaming about what would this entity look like? What would the mission be? What would the values be? And I'll tell you, this was some really fun stuff because we got to make it up. So on one hand, not being started by a large donation from a wealthy donor. That's how a lot of foundations are started, whether that wealthy donor is a corporation, whether that wealthy donor is just a rich person or someone who died and the funds are coming over. Those funds always have attachments. They come with whatever that entity or person's legacy in for charity, what they think what they want their money to support legally, that's what the money has to support. So not being tied to a wealthy donor, not being tied to someone else's agenda, is liberating on one hand because we get to build it, but it's challenging also because we have to raise the money. But that was the beginning of how we got this work started. And the cool thing is we were like, okay, because I didn't know nothing about building a foundation. It's like, can we, how do you build a foundation? Well, we figured that thing out. And but the cool thing was when it came to getting money, this group of women that was a part of our kitchen cabinet from across from mostly from the South, they said, how about if we appeal to Black women working in the field of philanthropy from across the nation and ask them to give of their own treasure, ask them to have their institutions match their gifts, and ask them to ask other friends, colleagues, allies in the field to give. That generated the first $100,000 for the foundation.
I love that.
And then that $100,000 leveraged larger institutional gifts. So that effort started in February of 2021. And by August 2021, we opened our doors with $1.3 million. So that's how we got started.
We got to clap it up for that. We got to clap it up for that. Man, that is beautiful. I want to transition to the significant leadership role just a second, because I was looking at your website, right? And often when you say when people say, "Oh, we a Black woman fund," or we this, that, the other, I always like going to see what the website looks like and the page looks like. I went on the website and I saw all of the board members, all the beautiful leaders on there. There was so much melanin on that page. I was like, oh, they really bout it. They bout it. Look at this. I went to show and not no pun on the Master B reference about it, but I went to one of my coworkers who I knew was about women empowerment too. I was like, yo, look at this page. She's like, oh my goodness, look at all this, all these women leaders on here, and it's melanated. Like, yo, we need to, how we do something like this? And she was just excited just seeing the page, and I told her, man, this is powerful just to see this visualization. Because when I often, I used to do youth programs, and when I used to talk to the youth about what they could be, because I had these funds from different institutions to help them get into like middle wage jobs and build a dream that wasn't obtainable to them. And they will always have a hard time envisioning it because they can't be what they can't see. It's like, that's not for me. I'm gonna just do this little rapping thing or this. I was like, no, you could do something different than that. What is it you dream? And it's like, I don't see nobody doing that. So I don't want. But now. Because of you, they get to see all these beautiful Black women doing things, setting the boundaries, living life on their terms. And that's significant when it comes to representation, visualization, and due to your significant leadership of making this happen. And, speaking of significant leadership, when you think of leadership roles, it comes with a set of challenges. You talked about that one challenge that you went through. Can you share some of the hurdles that you've encountered now that you've had to manage and navigate this huge fund and you're in the South and is predominantly Black woman led? Like what have you encountered, and how have you managed to navigate some of these obstacles?
Okay. Well, I said that on one hand, not being beholden to one funder or not is in one hand liberating, but on the other hand challenging. We are trying to do something different, and that is use multiple tools of philanthropy. So we're raising money from individuals. We're raising money from corporations. We haven't received public dollars yet, but we are trying to position ourselves to be a conduit for public dollars to go onto the ground in communities, being an intermediary of sorts.
Yeah.
We also know about setting up legacies. And we received our first planned gift 2 years ago and
Nice.
have established a legacy fund. And so we have the ability to accept donations of illiquid assets, as well as cash, stocks, what have you.
Nice.
We can do it. So, and I will say this. When I first started my career in philanthropy, I said I was in my late 20s when I came into this field. There were very few of us, men and women, Black men and women in this field. Very few. I was one of a few. I was not the first or of the first, but I certainly was one of few. And in this last 2 decades, this field has grown. Our presence has grown in this field. We have women who are presidents of national foundations, like Lejeune Tabron Montgomery, head of the Kellogg Foundation. Those kinds of things didn't exist when I first came into the field. We didn't have extensive presence. These jobs were considered very coveted jobs. People stayed in them until they retired. And, you didn't have many Black and brown people in these positions. But here we are now, years later, where the field has grown, our presence has grown in the field, and we know some things about some things, and we've been connected. And I'm telling you, I could not do this work by myself. This has come about through active sisterhood, through deep relationships that have been created, fostered, and nurtured over years, where people are sharing in this vision of, wow, what can we do together? Can we together create something that's permanent? So the challenges come with raising the money. One, that it's I think you can't talk to a nonprofit or to a startup entity. And I would say we had no vision of what was going to happen over the last 18 to 19 months. First, with the SCOTUS decision, to the Dobbs decision, to look at the loss of reproductive rights for women. That was a game changer for for any women's fund. And I would say for a fund dedicated to women of color, it is particularly challenging because, for instance, you have states in the South, like Alabama, where you cannot access prenatal care and birthing services in 2/3 of the state.
Wow.
2/3 of the state. And who do you think lives in those 2/3 of the state? So, in those 2/3 of the state, you have to travel far distances to be able to access prenatal services and birthing services, to be able to have your baby safely. So then you put another layer of, and people think like the Dobbs decision, you have extremists, you had states that had trigger laws lying in wait that they were executing quick, fast, and in a hurry to take it so far above and beyond an issue of abortion. And you look at, okay, you combine that with very little access to birth control. I'm sorry, contraceptives is also an issue, but very little access to birth services. And then you say you also cannot get abortion services. And then this state also has staggeringly high rates of maternal mortality. All these things are connected. So what this meant for our grantees, they said, hold on, first off, you have to understand, as women of color, reproductive justice for us is not it's not about abortion. That's not the first thing this is about for us. This is about, one, can we educate our children? And so you have sex ed being snatched from and not being taught in the schools, states like Louisiana, where it's abstinence only teaching. And yet here we have high rates of HIV, all of this. So in terms of the policy landscape, it has been tumultuous. And navigating this policy landscape and supporting nonprofits who are serving women of color who have been the most assaulted and attacked through this process has been something else. So that was the first. And then we had the repeal of affirmative action. And for this, the repeal of affirmative action has honestly put into question, it's called to question our very mission and this work. Is it legal to support women and girls of color in terms of our grant making? So we have gone through an extensive legal audit. I'm proud to say that we have been a client of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, who has done a thorough legal review of all of our public messaging, our internal documents, our grant making, to look at what is our level of risk for doing this work, what necessary challenges or not challenges, changes, must we make to be able to do this work. And at the end of the day, we're asking the question of, we're not changing our mission. How do we adhere to our mission to support the health, wealth, and power of Black women and other women of color in the South? How do we hold that mission with integrity and act and do the work true to our mission with fidelity? So those are the questions that we're asking now, like how we talk about the work, how we execute the work, and how we do that and keep it going, because we are determined to make this a permanent organization. That means raising an endowment, raising today money and forever money, and making this sustainable. So how we look at earned revenue and creating streams of earned revenue also for this work. So I know it might sound like we're throwing a lot of stuff out there and trying to do multiple things, but I would say all the good lessons from this field, from the nonprofit sector, and from business of how you make something sustainable, we are putting all those things to play.
And bless your heart, I'm glad you're doing this work, because it's so needed. And you had me thinking when you were talking about how you had to do that thorough edit with the lawyers in reference to some of the challenges. I was thinking about there's a women's VC that as a Black women's VC, I can't remember their name, that recently got sued by
the
some
Fearless
white
Fund.
company. Yeah, the Fearless Fund, and I was it was so ridiculous. They were suing them for doing the work that they're supposed to do.